Hi guys, just wanted to give an update. So we're now into the second year of the channel, and hopefully we'll break 100,000 subscribers sometime this year. Thank you for all your support. I only do this because of all of you, and I feel truly blessed. Also, just to let you know that January is usually a very busy month for me, but once it's passed, I'll focus on some big cases, so please be patient with me. This will include your recommendations. Next week's case will be heartbreaking. It is one that has recently been through the British courts and again raises the horrific consequences of domestic abuse. But returning to this week, I'm focusing on a killer whose sheer incompetence is actually laughable. I hope you find it interesting. Anyway, on with the video. In April 2016, 42-year-old Adrian Greenwood was a rare book dealer living in Oxford. His home was filled with novels which were worth a fortune, and this included a first edition of The Wind in the Willows, valued at £50,000. Adrian's eBay listing to sell this book had been seen by a desperate man called Michael Danaher, an individual who was unemployed and heavily in debt, and despite having no previous criminal history, had decided to rob, kidnap, and kill the rich and famous, and Adrian was firmly in his crosshairs. Michael Danaher killed Adrian in a savage knife attack, but this case is memorable due to the sheer incompetence and stupidity of Danaher, including taking a selfie of himself in broad daylight just after the murder with blood on his face. This is just one of a number of mistakes he made, which led the police straight to his door. Welcome to Evil Among Us. The victim in this case, Adrian Greenwood, was born in October 1973 in the town of Horsham in Surrey. He came from a privileged background. His father, Jeremy Greenwood, was a renowned historian, lecturer, researcher, and author of several books. Adrian was educated at Tonbridge School, a boarding school in Kent, where fees are around £35,000 a year. He then went on to study philosophy, politics and economics at Christ Church College, Oxford, and after earning his degree, completed an MBA at Imperial College London. Adrian was determined to make money and live a comfortable life, and he would achieve this by buying things cheaply and selling them for a profit. He began with lost property which people had left on trains, and then, when he'd made some money from this, he began to buy antique furniture. This venture failed, but eventually, in the year 2000, Adrian found his niche, buying and selling books, with him particularly focusing on rare and antique novels. The popularity of Harry Potter was something that Adrian took full advantage of, and he bought and sold rare first editions of each of the 7 books in the series. This brought him to public attention in October 2010, when a first edition of The Philosopher's Stone that Adrian had donated to an art exhibit was stolen. Adrian gave an interview and explained how difficult it would be for anyone to actually sell the stolen book. Essentially, the rare book market is very small and selective. A random trying to sell this novel, which was apparently worth £6,000, would instantly raise red flags. This piece of information, coupled with the public interest in the case, meant that the thief, or thieves, thought better of their decision, and the book was found in a carrier bag, dumped outside a shop a short time later. Unfortunately, as we'll see, Adrian's point was completely ignored by the man who would eventually kill him. Adrian also expanded into other areas, and is reported to have sold a piece of art by the street artist Banksy in 2011 for £60,000. In addition to money he made from these ventures, Adrian also wrote for antiques publications. By 2015, Adrian Greenwood was a wealthy man and was living at 25 Iffley Road in the city of Oxford in Oxfordshire, in a flat worth approximately £625,000. His home was a treasure trove, with shelves filled with rare books and first editions, which to the uninitiated would just seem like old books, but which in total were likely worth several £1,000,000. By this point, Adrian had acquired a first edition of the 1908 book Wind in the Willows by the British author Kenneth Grahame, worth approximately £50,000. On August 4, 2015, he, like he'd done hundreds of times before, put the book on eBay, with the auction set to end in April 2016. Little did Adrian know that this one listing would set in motion a chain of events which would lead to him being brutally stabbed to death in his own home when it was seen by a deranged and desperate wannabe criminal called Michael Danaher. He was a man thousands of pounds in debt, who despised those who had more than him, and who was determined to take what he felt entitled to from the rich and famous, even if it meant killing them. A man whose savagery was matched only by his stupidity. Michael Danaher was born in around 1966, and there's no information available regarding his early life, aside from the fact that he apparently came from a loving and supportive Irish family. In fact, before this horrific crime, he was essentially an average Joe just trying to make it through life. In 1995, Danaher met a woman called Elaine when the pair worked together in a branch of John Lewis in the city of Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. Elaine described Danaher as happy and secure in himself, someone who made her laugh, and in the year 2000 they got married. However, by this point, issues were developing in the relationship. Both Danaher's mother and father passed away. Despite attempts by Elaine to get him to talk to someone about his grief, he closed in on himself, and there was a distance between him and his wife. In 2001, the pair had their first child, Ryan, followed by Jacob in 2010. Soon after the birth of Jacob, Elaine was struck down with pneumonia, and Danaher appeared to fall to pieces, trying to raise the children and support his ill wife. He would be jovial one minute, and then shouting at the boys the next. Danaher then became paranoid, accusing Elaine of cheating on him, and this would lead to blazing rows. In 2012, Elaine could not deal with her husband's erratic behaviour and left him, moving into rented accommodation with the boys. The family home was sold, and Danaher moved to Hadrian's Court in Peterborough. Over the next few years, his life continued to fall apart. He lost his job as a senior manager at an engine company after falling out with one of his bosses, and lost £50,000 of his own money in a get-rich-quick scam. By 2015, 49-year-old Michael Danaher was unemployed, £13,000 in debt, living in squalor, eating takeaways every night, which meant that his weight had ballooned to 25 stone and he developed diabetes. To scrape a living, he'd taken to buying and selling used items on eBay for a tiny profit. Outwardly, despite his life being in ruins, Danaher appeared calm. He maintained a good relationship with Elaine and the boys, although they all raised concerns that he wasn't looking after himself. Elaine has stated that at no point during the entire time that she knew Danaher was he ever violent. In fact, she stated he was a, quote, gentle giant. But despite his outward appearance, Michael Danaher was beginning to lose touch with reality and was consumed by anger, which he would turn towards the rich and famous, with him deciding he was going to take what they had, regardless of the cost. As we'll return to later, it's clear that by 2015, Michael Danaher was consumed with rage. This was directed towards the rich and famous, whose lives stood in stark contrast to the ruins of his own. He was scraping by, selling rubbish on eBay, and these people were making millions. They didn't deserve it. He did. And so Danaher began to draw up a list of rich people to target, contained within a document on his computer, which was headed Enterprises. It needs to be pointed out that Michael Danaher had no criminal record at all. He was not known to the police for any reason, but despite this, he clearly had aspirations of being a master criminal. The list included names of well-known UK and international celebrities such as Simon Cowell, Kate Moss, Katie Hopkins, Eamon Holmes, Gary Lineker, and Louise Redknapp. However, Danaher also included names of rich people who were from various fields, including business. These were people that Danaher was going to target to rob them of their riches. However, as I come back to later, I think this was possibly a secondary objective, and there was something more insidious that he was trying to achieve. Next to each name was a heading titled Modus, i.e. modus operandi, how he was going to do it, and there was also a column marked Take, as in what he could get away with. He also wrote down the person's address and his rationale for why they deserved to be targeted. Most of the reasons were personal grievances that Danaher held against them, which were separate to their wealth, for example their political leanings, with him labelling at least one of his targets a scum Tory. Under methods, Michael Danaher included various ways of gaining compliance, including use of a stun gun, with him buying one of these, disguised as a mobile phone, in December 2015. He also wrote about use of psychological pressure and included details of planning to abduct the sister and daughter of at least one of his targets and holding them for ransom. These lists were not just fantasy. Danaher spent a significant amount of time using the internet to identify the addresses of his targets. He was even found to have the floor plan of the home of TV presenter Anthea Turner. Sometime in late 2015, Michael Danaher came across the eBay listing made by Adrian Greenwood in August of that year, where he was trying to sell his first edition copy of The Wind in the Willows. After doing some initial research, likely reading news articles regarding the theft of the Harry Potter book in 2010, as well as him being linked to the sale of a Banksy artwork in 2011, Danaher decided that Adrian deserved to be targeted, and so he was added to the list. No doubt he had fantasies of the thousands of pounds from the sale of the book going straight into his pocket. On his spreadsheet, Danaher wrote that he would use any method to get what he wanted, would get rare books from the crime, and that he was targeting Adrian because he was a, quote, tosser, i.e. another word for a prick. As 2015 progressed, Michael Danaher's internet search history became more disturbing. He was researching topics including how to open a door without keys, the most efficient way to kill someone, and how to buy weapons, including samurai swords. It's clear, at least to me, that even if Danaher initially began by considering robbing these people and letting them live, by the end of 2015, as well as attempting to make money, he was firmly set on killing those he targeted, erasing what he considered scum from the face of the planet. By the beginning of 2016, Michael Danaher had obtained Adrian Greenwood's home address in Oxford, and for around 3 months prior to the murder, in April of that year, he had driven backwards and forwards from his home in Peterborough 5 times, watching his target and honing his plan. Danaher was not solely focused on Adrian Greenwood. He was also travelling to and from other properties of the rich and famous. One of these was a man called Adrian Beecroft, a wealthy businessman and donor to the Conservative Party, whose home in London Danaher turned up outside on the 22nd of March 2016, around 2 weeks before the murder. He was dressed as a delivery driver and holding a package. When Adrian Beecroft's wife opened the door, he tried to force his way in and only fled when she began screaming. This attempt should have shown Michael Danaher how incompetent he was, how his plan was doomed to failure, but he was undeterred, and he set his sights firmly on Adrian Greenwood, and this time he would get what he wanted, no matter what happened. To 42-year-old Adrian Greenwood, Tuesday the 5th of April 2016 was like any other day, and he was captured in and around the Oxfordshire area, going about his business. The last sighting of him was around 6 p.m. at a Sainsbury's supermarket in Oxford Road in Kidlington. I find these types of images so haunting, knowing that this person is walking around completely unaware that this is their last day alive. At the same time, Michael Danaher was in his flat in Peterborough, researching how to buy a handgun with a silencer, how to hide a car, and reading a document called Getting Away with Murder, Britain's Most Notorious Crimes. Googling how to get away with murder is not exactly the best way to, get away with murder. At 10:45 a.m. the next day, Wednesday the 6th of April 2016, Danaher got into his Citroën Picasso and began the journey to Oxford, arriving at approximately 12:40 p.m. He parked up around 200 metres away from Adrian Greenwood's home at 25 Iffley Road and was captured on CCTV walking towards the scene of the crime. At around 12:50 p.m, Michael Danaher knocked on Adrian's door. It's notable that as soon as Adrian answered, 25-stone Danaher forced his way in. The man that people considered a gentle giant then got a knife from Adrian's kitchen and launched into a frenzied attack, stabbing him 33 times in the chest and neck, severing his right jugular vein and severing his airway. The attack was so vicious that the knife blade snapped off. Injuries on Adrian's hands suggest that he tried to defend himself, including grabbing hold of the knife, and puncture wounds on his body suggest that at some point he'd been tortured, inevitably to discover the location of what Danaher had come for, the first edition of The Wind in the Willows. Part of this interrogation also likely involved Adrian being stamped on, with this shattering his shoulder. This was not a quick death, and Adrian would have suffered a great deal of pain and fear, before he eventually passed away from blood loss. Danaher then robbed the place. He found the book he'd come for and put it in his bag, as well as Adrian's laptop, his wallet and his phone. With regards to Adrian's phone, Danaher didn't switch this off, apparently unaware the police could easily use this to track his movements. He also took the knife handle of the murder weapon with him. After 2 hours, Michael Danaher left the flat. This was caught on a passing bus. He didn't rush away. Instead, he stood in broad daylight and took a selfie with blood on his face. This appears to have been his own blood, as he'd injured himself in the frenzied knife attack that had ended Adrian's life. Danaher then drove back to Peterborough with Adrian's phone in the car, capturing his entire route. When he got home, he called his son Ryan, who was 14 at the time, and told him that 2 thugs had tried to rob him at knife points in Essex, but he'd fought them off, although he'd been injured. Ryan rushed round to his father's property to check he was okay, and it was at this point Danaher showed him the stolen copy of Wind in the Willows. He gave no explanation where he got it from, but he told his son that he'd be able to sell it for £2,000, a fraction of its real value. It was only at this point that Adrian's phone was switched off, and instead of Danaher getting rid of the knife handle of the murder weapon, he hid this in his property. Keeping this and taking the selfie has a specific purpose, which I'll come back to later. A few hours after returning home, Danaher opened up his spreadsheet and deleted Adrian Greenwood's name. 1 target down, plenty more to go, but first he needed to get rid of the book, and so he listed it on eBay. Danaher clearly felt he committed the perfect murder and was going to use the fear that had come from what he'd just done to intimidate his future targets. On the same day that he murdered Adrian Greenwood, Danaher drafted a letter, but never sent it, to the wife of the businessman he targeted a few weeks before, Adrian Beecroft, demanding £90,000 in Bitcoin and telling her to look at the local news in Oxford about a murder on Iffley Road, as this is what would happen to her and her family if they didn't comply. However, Michael Danaher's criminal career would end almost as quickly as it began, and the police would soon be knocking down his door. In the early afternoon of Thursday the 7th of April 2016, the day after the murder, Adrian Greenwood's cleaner used her key to let herself into the property. Lying in the hallway, she found her employer lying in a pool of blood. She screamed at the top of her lungs, which alerted a passing nurse who rushed through the open door and saw the carnage in front of her. The nurse got on the phone to 999 and told the operator, quote, "There's a man on the floor. He's covered in blood. He doesn't look conscious. There's no sign of life." Police and paramedics quickly arrived, but it was clear that Adrian was beyond saving, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The area was cordoned off, and a murder investigation began, led by Thames Valley Police's major crime unit. Adrian's property was searched, and the blade of the murder weapon was quickly found. He kept a detailed inventory of his books, and it was quickly discovered that a first edition copy of The Wind in the Willows had been taken, along with Adrian's wallet, laptop, and importantly his phone. To the detectives' surprise, they were able to see that Adrian's phone had travelled from Oxford to Peterborough after the time he was believed to have been murdered. They then spent thousands of hours going through CCTV footage and automatic number plate recognition data. Eventually, 5,300 vehicles travelling along a similar route was whittled down to 20, and then 1. There was only 1 car that had driven the exact route from Oxford to Peterborough, tracked by the phone, on the afternoon of Wednesday the 6th of April 2016, a Citroën Picasso which belonged to Michael Danaher. Police were able to obtain a picture of Danaher from his driving licence and matched his face to footage of a man walking towards and away from Adrian Greenwood's flat on the day of the murder. Using the licence plate information, detectives were able to see Michael Danaher's 5 trips between Peterborough and Oxford in the months before the murder, his practice runs. On Sunday the 10th of April 2016, just 4 days after the killing, the police came in force and broke down the front door of Michael Danaher's flat in Hadrian's Court, Peterborough, and he was arrested on suspicion of murder. The police then found a treasure trove of evidence. This included the handle of a kitchen knife, which was found to fit the broken blade found at the crime scene perfectly. The police also recovered the stun gun disguised as a mobile phone that Danaher had bought. Things only got worse when his laptop was taken and analysed. The eBay posting was found, along with Danaher's list of potential targets and his research about literally how to get away with murder. Michael Danaher gave nothing away during interview. He responded no comment to all questions, but the evidence was overwhelming, and on Tuesday the 12th of April 2016, he was charged with the murder of Adrian Greenwood. The next day, he appeared at a short hearing at Banbury Magistrates Court where he confirmed his name, address and date of birth before being remanded pending the Crown Court proceedings. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Michael Danaher continued to demonstrate his stupidity and incompetence and pleaded not guilty to the murder of Adrian Greenwood. During his 3-week trial at Oxford Crown Court, Danaher claimed that he'd gone to Adrian Greenwood's property to buy cheap books, but Adrian had then suddenly attacked him with a knife. He'd taken the weapon away from him and stabbed him, so it wasn't cold-blooded murder, it was self-defence. He had apparently taken the photo with blood on his face as evidence of the fact that he'd been attacked. This story, like Danaher's plan from beginning to end, was ridiculous and full of holes. Adrian didn't sell cheap books, and there was no evidence of any communication at all between the pair. With regards to self-defence, people like Danaher seem to wheel this out when they get caught, ignoring the fact that this is about a proportionate response to a threat to life, not stabbing someone 33 times. As to the research that Danaher had conducted on his laptop and the list of potential targets that he'd drawn up, get ready for this. He claimed this was not him, but another man, who he wouldn't name, apparently due to fear, but we'll call him the Phantom. So this guy, who definitely was real, would come and go from Danaher's Peterborough flat at all hours of the day and night, and had full access to his laptop. The police had also used number plate recognition data and GPS tracking of Danaher's phone to place him in the location of the attempted break-in of the home of businessman Adrian Beecroft in London on the 22nd of March 2016, around 2 weeks before the murder. And what was his explanation for this? Danaher stated that he was such a nice person that he would regularly lend the Phantom his car and phone, so it must have been him who committed this crime. The prosecution destroyed every last part of Danaher's defence, and he was shown for what he was, a cold-blooded, premeditated murderer who had killed Adrian Greenwood in a frenzy of violence and who was fully intending to continue his campaign of terror, robbing, kidnapping and killing the rich and famous to line his own pockets. On Monday the 24th of October 2016, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Michael Danaher guilty of murder. The same day, he stood before Judge Ian Pringle QC for sentencing. Addressing Danaher, he stated, quote, "Despite the fact that at 50, you had no previous convictions, warnings or cautions of any sort, it is clear that during the course of 2015, you drew up this list, probably to rob or burgle people, or perhaps kidnap people and hold them to ransom so as to gain funds for yourself. It's clear from the timeline in this case, you became almost obsessive about keeping up on famous celebrities." Judge Pringle also described the attack on Adrian as being a savage stabbing which clearly demonstrated significant premeditation and planning. He then sentenced him. For the murder of Adrian Greenwood, 50-year-old Michael Danaher was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 34 years, meaning that he will be unable to apply for release until he's in his 80s. But even if he lives this long, given how dangerous he is, he's unlikely to ever be released. During the video, I've outlined how stupid Michael Danaher was as a criminal, but I need to bring the focus back to just how cruel and evil he is. He's not a gentle giant, he's a cold-blooded monster who was willing to torture, kidnap and kill to meet his own selfish needs. At the centre of Danaher's character was his feelings of powerlessness, but also difficulty taking responsibility for his own life and resentment towards others who he felt were succeeding when he was failing. Danaher was a man who clearly didn't talk about his feelings, and he was like a swan, all tranquil on the surface, but underneath the water he was furiously paddling, trying to stay afloat. I do have some sympathy for him. I believe the death of Danaher's parents began the deterioration in his mental health, as some of his behaviour was a reflection of this. For example, him accusing his wife of cheating on him, I think was, in part, because he was absolutely terrified that he would lose someone else in his life that he loved. But his inability to talk about this and deal with his emotions meant that he began to act in a way that made the marriage untenable, and he and his wife separated. Essentially, he created the situation he ultimately feared. However, this is where my sympathy for Michael Danaher ends. I think that he began to blame everyone else around him for his situation and essentially wallowed in his own self-pity. It's not unusual to feel a pang of resentment if you're going through a hard time and you see others around you who are not, but ultimately you know that they have to get on with their life and you have to get on with yours. But with Danaher, he wanted everyone to be as miserable as him. Why the hell should other people have what he wanted or had lost? I think he then began a pattern of self-sabotaging behaviour, including falling out with his boss, essentially hijacking his own life just to feed into his self-pitying mentality. So after losing his employment, he wouldn't have reflected and said, "Man, I acted like a dick," or "I best look for another job." He just sat around and went, "Woe is me. See, life is so cruel. I'm so much of a victim." I think that Danaher believed that the world owed him and that he didn't have to go out and work for things. Someone should just knock on his door and then thrust a sack full of cash into his hands. Michael Danaher then focused all of his resentment and hatred onto the rich and famous, and this is understandable given his mentality. These men and women are presented as people who have pots of money, perfect lives, and never have a care in the world. Obviously, with just a little bit of thought, we all realise that celebrities are just like us, that money and fame doesn't equal happiness, as shown by recent events. But Danaher bought into this fantasy. These people were happy, and he was not. That was unfair. At this point, it's really important to understand why Danaher targeted these individuals and what he was trying to achieve, and realise that his actions were not just about money. In fact, I believe this was his secondary, not his primary objective. This was about power, wielding the ultimate control over others, being in command of whether they lived or died. This would give his sad little life purpose. So to justify his behaviour, I think that Michael Danaher began to dehumanise his people. He formed opinions about these targets who he'd never even met, deciding they were pricks because they donated to political parties he didn't agree with, or how they carried themselves. For example, with Adrian Greenwood, he decided, having never met him, he was a tosser. These rich people and celebrities were not worthy of what they had. They were all dickheads. Their status was unjustified. He was going to level the playing field. In terms of a comparison, I think that Michael Danaher didn't see himself as some sort of sad, overweight man. He was the Punisher, here to bring balance to the world. Money clearly was part of his motivation, but I have no doubt that Danaher's dreams and waking fantasies revolved mainly around the kidnap, torture and killing of these people who he felt were unworthy, with him getting a rush of excitement, seeing the fear in their eyes. If he could make himself rich, then all the better, but I think that this feeling of being in total control was his overriding concern. I think further evidence to support this is shown by Danaher's internet history. As time progressed, he was searching more and more about how to kill people. He wanted to wield ultimate power over someone by taking their life. Danaher's callousness and evil is also shown by the fact that he decided that anyone linked to his main target was fair game, even their wives and sisters, people who had nothing to do with anything, but they were fine to kidnap, hold hostage and kill. Michael Danaher's thinking also shows an important trait of his personality, his narcissism, his perception that he was better than the rich and famous, and this trait also fed into his belief of himself as a master criminal. Danaher, despite never having committed a serious crime in his life, as far as we know, appeared to think that any plan he came up with was foolproof. He'd read some articles online about how to get away with a perfect murder, and I imagine he was scoffing at what he was looking at. I don't need to read this, I know what I'm doing. Fortunately for the rest of society, this ridiculous overconfidence would be his downfall, with him making so many mistakes after the murder of Adrian Greenwood that it's almost laughable. I know that Danaher was described by his family as being a gentle giant, and there seems to be this perception that he went from being this loving family man to some sort of cold, callous monster, but this isn't the case. I don't rely very much on the perception of those closest to a person to describe them. as they often make excuses for their behaviour. This is understandable because they love that person, but I cannot believe there were no red flags years before the murder, little flashes of the narcissistic, self-absorbed and callous man Michael Danaher really was. And so he targeted Adrian Greenwood. I've no doubt Danaher went to his flat in Oxford intending to kill him. Getting the wind of the Willows book and making money from selling this was a secondary objective. He was there to punish Adrian for being a tosser. Danaher tortured Adrian with the knife, stamped on him, and lightly made him beg for his life, enjoying every moment of his torment. The attack was a frenzy, 33 stab wounds, far in excess of what was needed to kill him. This was about punishment. Each stab wound, he was likely thinking, or even saying out loud, "You think you're better than me? I'll show you." As to why Danaher took a photo outside, this was a memento of his first kill. He did this in broad daylight because he was buzzing, excited about what he'd just done. He needed to take a photo immediately. He kept the knife handle of the murder weapon, as this was a trophy. When he was caught, Michael Danaher thought he was very smart. He could claim self-defense and blame his crimes on some imaginary man, and he would escape justice. He was as stupid as he is evil. Had he not been caught, Michael Danaher would have killed again, and would have eventually joined a small group of killers who began their sprees later in life. He was unfazed by the killing of Adrian Greenwood, and likely went to sleep that night on a high. It would have only been a matter of time before he wanted to chase that feeling again. Michael Danaher is a very dangerous man. I don't think there's any way he will ever see freedom again. He will die behind prison walls, likely blaming everyone else for how his life has turned out. So, what are your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, and you can also send a one-off donation to support the channel using the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.